generation South African. My family arrived in Cape Town a little over 300 years ago. Beside me is Renius Mhlongo. He's just a third generation South African. Yes, Joma. But more interestingly, he's one of the last people alive today to be raised on the original traditions of a Shangaan hunter-gatherer. Ren was born in a mud hut underneath a jackalberry tree in a place that is today part of the Kruger National Park. 30 years ago, the two of us were thrown together to become ranger and tracker, to take paying guests out on safaris at Longdalozi Game Reserve. And what followed has been a 3-decade-long journey that has profoundly changed both of our lives. And that's the story we'd like to share with you this morning. If you don't mind, although Ren can speak English and understand it well, when he tells stories and describes events, he prefers to speak in his own language, Shangaan, which I will translate. If you don't mind, we'd like to start with Ren just telling you a little bit about where he comes from and his early beginnings. Good morning to you all. Thank you so much for coming to listen to our story. I was born in a place called Mchipofo. It's a sort of southern region of Kruger Park. My job as a young boy was to look after my father's cattle and goats to protect them from lions and hyenas. As we said, I grew up in the Kruger. One morning we got up and we went into the bush to graze the livestock. That particular morning, which was unusual, my father decided to come with us in the bush to spend the day. We spent most of the day until sort of mid-afternoon in the bush. We started to slowly bring them round back towards our homestead. There, on the way back, we came to an area where a cheetah had killed a small antelope called a steenbok. So the deal was in those days, although the Mhlongos lived inside the game reserve, if you found where a cheetah or any carnivore had killed something or something had died, you could take it, as long as you marked the closest tree with your panga as evidence of where this occurred. That was not regarded as poaching. We hadn't eaten meat for 3 weeks. He forgot, he was in a rush and he forgot to mark the tree. I don't think I need to translate that. Suffice to say, his father successfully got the cheetah off its kill. Took the steenbok home to his mother. And my mother cooked it that night. Ate very well. The next morning, the local warden and some of his anti-poaching unit came through the Mhlongo homestead on a routine check. They wanted to make it, they used to do these routine checks from time to time. And he found the skin of the steenbok lying in their yard. Renis's father's name was Judas. He said, Judas, where did you find this meat? And he explained. This was not the first time that this had happened, where he'd forgotten to mark the tree and he found the meat. Right there, the warden took out a piece of paper and wrote an eviction letter and told the Mhlongo family they must get out. My father immediately rushed to Bushbuck Ridge, which is the local administrative capital of the apartheid government for that region, to try and get a permit for the cows, to get the cows out. My father went to Bushbuck Ridge. The next day came. We took our cows and goats out as usual with my brothers. Again, we spent the whole day in the bush. They find themselves on a high-lying area, and way to the north, they see a big yellow bulldozer coming down what is today the western boundary of the Kruger National Park. And the boys thought, well, what's going on there? I wonder what this bulldozer is here for.
Look,
They continued on, now bringing the cows back towards their house. They get home, they arrive back, and Renius and his brothers discover the worst. The entire homestead has been flattened. They get there, everything is flattened. My mother is praying, she's crying. She explains that big yellow machine with a big blade came and destroyed everything. She tells them we have to leave and we go northwards. Why my mother chose to take us northwards, Ren says he doesn't know. By this stage, the sun was starting to set. We collected all the belongings we were able to from the wreckage. And we went north in the direction my mother told us to go. Imagine walking in the Kruger National Park at night with lumbering cows, with no lights, no weapons, nothing, with small children. It's as dangerous as you can make it. But we went. We went into the unknown. We got to a river. This one here, it's called Wandamahara. It's called the Sand River. It's the same river that today famous private lodges like Londolozi, Singita, and Mala Mala are now situated along. This river is full of hippos and full of crocodiles. Renius was young. He doesn't know how. Ren doesn't know when he was born. Explain to them why you don't know why you were born. His mother had a stick, and she would mark every year for their year that they were born. He says his older brother took the stick in the bush one day and left it there. So he didn't know when he was born. The river was flowing strongly that year. They get to the southern bank. His mother says to him, you take hold of your favorite cow. Renius had a favorite cow called Vetlis. It was black and white. He says, you hold on to the tail of Vetlis. She'll drag you through the water. Water, the Vetlisa goes into the water. Renius is holding onto the tail. The water starts to wash it because it's flowing strong. Again, I'm sure you get this. Halfway through the water, halfway through the river, hippos start to make that call. And these are now sounds that are burned into Ren's memory. Whenever he hears hippos call, he remembers those moments crossing the river at night.
Mobile Sukumak, Sasekisa.
I know that when I tell the story now, even for me, I laugh. But at those moments, I was deeply afraid. We get onto the northern bank of the Sand River. We make a small fire and we build a temporary kraal for our cows. We settle for the night. Not long after we settle, we realize that lions have smelt the cows. From the east, they start to hear at every call that lions are closer and closer and closer. Eventually, they could see them in the half light around their camp. My brother and I, we did not sleep that whole night. We shot lions with our catties all night long. And I want to report to you the thing I'm very happy about that night. Not one, we didn't lose a single cow that night. The next day, the sun got up and we continued northwards. We arrived in a village. We just came upon a village called Dixie. The chief of the village was a man called Nkune. He welcomed the Mklongo family and gave them a place to stay. We stayed a few days with him. That was the year of 1969 that happened. As I stand before you now, Dixie remains my home since 1969. Thank you very much. Now you know where I come from. 2 or 3 months into our working together, I get to learn my very first lesson as a young game ranger. A lesson taught to me by a leopard, but very much facilitated by Renius. We have a group of 6 Canadians that come to Londolozi. They were seriously keen to see a leopard. They told me they'd saved their whole lives. They'd come to South Africa to Londolozi for the express purpose of seeing a leopard. For 3 days they were with us. We didn't even look like finding a leopard. I remember on the final morning, at the wheel of the Land Rover, I had my 6 Canadians on the back. Renius was sitting on the front of the tractor seat. I was 19 years old. As the wheels of the Land Rover dipped into the riverbed called the Mashabendonga, Renius was sitting in the front. He started to bash on the bottom. You see me, and he pointed down. Stopped the car, I got out, I walked around, and he was staring at this most inconspicuous little mark on the ground. Then he knelt down at this, and he drew with his finger a circle around this little mark. And he said to me, he says, these tracks are the Tubuan female leopard. He says, they're fresh, let's follow. Now, what was interesting about this leopard, Tubuan female, is that on most days she was totally calm and accepting of us. She'd virtually brush herself up against the vehicle as she moved along. Guests could take as many pictures as they wanted to, no problem. But then on other days, she'd be lying under a bush. Invariably, a guest would say to me, hey, Alex, can we get closer for a better picture? And being a young, enthusiastic ranger, I said, sure, and I'd drive. And this leopard would start to stare and growl. And then you knew trouble was coming. This leopard was beautiful and dangerous all at the same time. Now, what would normally happen here is that if Ren found fresh tracks like that, okay, he'd take the rifle and the handheld radio, he'd take those tracks, and he'd follow those tracks into the bush, and he'd go and try and find that animal. And then he'd leave me in the Land Rover to drive around to the next road to go and park and wait for him. I hated it. I wanted to be tracking, I didn't want to be with the guests. He, up until then, hadn't trusted me to go within 1 foot. But this day was different. He invited me to come along with him. Remember my head swelling and pulled the rifle off the rifle rack, and winked at my desk and said, cheers, I'm going to go and find you a leopard like I did every day. That was the first day. Now, my job was the protector. After all, I'd been on the Cleve Genie Advanced Rifle Handling course. Thankfully, Renius had never seen the results of that course. More importantly, I was to be the eyes of the operation, because as Red would be looking for the spoor in the sand, my job was to look up so that if we found the animal, hopefully I'd spot it at a distance so we didn't get too close. the tracks of the Tukwantuma came off the bank of the Mshabendongi into the riverbed and headed downstream. Told our Canadians, you stay on the car, you're safe. I went to walk. I had the rifle and I was looking at all the bits of shade and Ren started to follow. We must have moved 30, 40 meters down the riverbed. And I noticed Ren's whole body language had altered slightly. I remember thinking to myself, I wonder what he knows that I don't. And I was trying to keep up my psychology. I wanted to prove that I was going to be an asset on this trip. About 100 meters down the river, now we're following, but Ren is going slower and slower. Ren stops, kneels down again. He draws another circle around another very clear track this time of the left. He says to me, I'm fine. He says, these tracks, young boy, are walking now. This animal is close by. We get going. About 30 or 40 meters down the riverbed, we hear a tree squirrel start to make an alarm. Now, tree squirrels, alarm for snakes, eagles at each other, leopards. We had just seen an African hawk eagle go over. We weren't certain, had the eagle disturbed the squirrel? In fact, the leopard was that close by. There were a few logs that had been washed down from previous year's flood. I put my foot on the log, hesitate. As I take the next step, this leopard explodes out of the bush. I cannot tell her teeth from her tail, from side to side like this. Now, I try and back up. I trip over the log, I just fallen over. My rifle gets smashed out of reach. The animal comes straight up and screams, lands with its paw on the log that just tripped over, sand hits me in the shins. She's right over me like this. I just remember her tail lashing from side to side. I can smell her breath, she's so close. Renius is off to the left. He says to me, "Ha majomba, hima." He used to call me majomba. It means small boots. He says, hima. Wait, I thought, well, I'm not going anywhere. In the meantime, the animal's coming again. More sand hitting me in the shins, and inside of me, this internal battle is developing. My head is saying, get out, you must get out of there. Half of myself saying, no, let's kind of stay where you are, that's what you were trained to do. Anyhow, Renius still off the left, says to me, "Unga puka tifu." He says, don't look her in the eyes. So I looked down, and this made it worse because their growling was absolutely deafening. It sounded like a chainsaw being revved in front of me. He says to me, "Okay, Tana Anzabo Gatongo." He says, "Come back slowly." So I'm not so sure this is the right place. I hesitated. He says to me, "Amajomba, small boots, Tana Anzabo, come back." So I thought, well, I'm in no position to start negotiating. I moved my bum in the sand just like that. And I see the leopard start to relax. Just like, oh, you're perfect. He says, that's almost slowly. The more distance I put between me and the animal, the more. He says he wants to tell you what really happened. The problem with Alex at that time, he didn't listen so nicely. And the food is like, and the other problem is he's quite arrogant.
But in king, man.
But the bigger problem is him. I never taught Alex how to deal with a dangerous leopard on foot before. He wants to know from you, do you teach your staff how to handle the dangerous situations? Because if you don't do that, they're going to get eaten like Alex has nearly eaten the donga. Thank you very much. In this country, in these economic and political times, where disgust and suspicion is so much a part of our society, we all need to work so much harder at showing our trustworthiness, just like Ren did that morning in the donga. Time went on. Got better at dealing with dangerous leopards on foot, and about 18 months later, right out of the blue, Ren comes to me. He says to me he'd like to invite me to come and stay with him in Dixie, the place he just told me about. He says, come for a weekend. Now, to be honest, I wasn't sure I wanted to go to Dixie. I didn't think, based on what happened in 1969, that I would be welcome there, A. And B, to be frank, the media had told me places like Dixie were not good for white people to go. And it became a bit of a to and fro, and I was starting to run out of excuses why I couldn't go to Dixie. And eventually, I got the sense if I didn't go, it would have a material impact on our relationship. So almost out of desperation, I said to Ren, okay, I'll come to Dixie. Now, Dixie is a remote Shangaan village. It's located up in the top northeast part of the park, of the country, excuse me, right up against the Kruger National Park. His village sits, that's the boundary of the park right there. Ren's house is about the top of that E. He can literally hit a tennis ball into the game reserve from where he lived. Only about 400 people live there, 70% of whom live in these mud huts, which they make from termite mounds and then grass. No flowing water, no electricity. This was the year of 1995. Ren had a job at that time for 10 or 12 years, and he would have been considered one of the more affluent members of the Dixie community. He lived in this very simple air brick home with a zinc roof. I arrived, it was a Friday afternoon, I get invited in. They show me, I go in this narrow passageway, and there's a doorway. Ren opens the door, he says, "This is my bedroom." I said, "That's nice, Ren." He says, "This is where you're going to stay." I said, "Ren, I can't stay in your bedroom." He says, "No, you're my VPI guest," he says. His bed was definitely king size, with this bright red bedspread over it, and it had a white cloth banner that said, "I love you." I'm not sure you put it there for me. He had a headboard, the most ornate headboard, the wireless radio built in the middle. And he told me he'd spent 5 years saving for that bed and headboard. How many of us sitting here today would move out of our own personal bedroom with someone from a culture different to us, who we worked for 18 months, to stay here? Not many of us. Would you agree? Yeah. Anyhow, that evening we had a fantastic meal, and we had gourmet. I thought we were going to eat traditional food that night, but Renius organized for the off-duty head chef, a guy called Julian Glover, who was the off-duty head chef of Londolozi Game Reserve, and who was on leave at the same time and who lived in Dixie, to come and to cook for me. This is him over here. This guy, he may not look like much, but he recently won a cooking competition against the Australian Master Chef champion. Sure. This is a series. He's now the head chef of a multinational tourism company. And this is Ren's mother, Anania, who was born on the same day as Nelson Mandela and died the day after he died. Sure. And then this is Ren's son, who was 6 years of age, called Nature. And we had an incredible evening that night. We sat around the fire, we drank Marula beer, castle beer, and I learned about what mattered to these people. And I learned about what was troubling the people of Dixie. And I learned more in Dixie in those 3 days than I had in the whole 18 months or so of working. Next morning, Nature brings me a bath. I want you to just consider the effort that went into that. Nature had to go in the bush, collect the wood, come back, make a fire. Then go with a wheelbarrow to the borehole 2 kilometers away, get the water, come back and cook it, boil it. And I calculated 25 kettle loads of hot water into that bath. I won't keep this up for too long, but I have stayed in a few 5-star places around the world, but the spirit of hospitality at Ren's house was beyond anything I'd ever experienced before. This was extreme hospitality. This was the ultimate form of giving, particularly when you consider the limited means from where it came from. Ren, how much did it cost you to put together? When I invited Alex to come to Dixie, I had worked with 12 rangers before. I invited all of them to come to Dixie to see my family. Not a single one came. I started to believe that white people did not want to be close to African people. When Alex came to Dixie, it restored my faith that maybe we can be together. This was not easy. I had to tell my family that I'm going to bring a white person to Dixie was not easy at all. And there are two reasons for this. Number one, my house was smaller than I expected Alex would have stayed. Then we met with Alex, my family, and discussed this. The second reason is that of what had happened in 1969. To bring a white person after we'd been chased there, to bring a white person in. But eventually, we sat around and we decided that if you are serious about forming a relationship with somebody different, you must take it. I said, Ren, how about 2 weeks in London? First thing he said was, only if we can drive. Now the proverbial shoe was on the other foot. Now it was my turn to convince him to go into the unknown. Eventually he agreed, and I remember we flew on Virgin Airways, and I know this because Virgin, as far as I'm aware, was the first airline to give the personalized TVs to the economy class of the aeroplane. We climbed on board, we got seated next to each other, and I showed Ren how to use his personal TV. And we got a few beers going, and we took off. And there were a few movies. What did you say now? Die Hard. He said something about Die Hard, and we get going. There's a lot of fear in the takeoff. Anyhow, we get through that, and now Ren's watching Die Hard. About 20 minutes into the flight, I noticed he switched from Die Hard on the map, on the TV, to that breadcrumb trail map that you can watch the plane as it makes its way painstakingly slowly up towards the United Kingdom. I said to him, Ren, there's nice movies here. What? He says, no, I like the map, he says. For 11 and a half hours. Ren watches the map of Africa. As we were in short final, I was about to land in Heathrow again. He nudges me like this. He says, hey, Butchie, if you have to come back here by driving or walking, I know the way now. We arrived in London, we had an amazing time there. We went and visited many of the historical sites that London has to offer, and in many ways, this became Ren's first-hand view of the Western world. But the thing he really wanted to do when we were there, this was one of his passions as a younger man, was fast motor cars, especially Ferraris. He said he wants to go to he's heard that here in London, they sell the latest Ferraris. And I said to him, no man, Ren, when we get back to Joburg, there are lots of places there. And he wouldn't let up. Anyhow, on the last morning, we went to Kensington, which apparently had a place that sold some of these cars. We walked around the streets, and eventually we find this place called HRO. It's got these massive glass doors, and beyond the windows are these incredibly polished red and yellow Ferraris on the showroom floor. We get into the doorway. The salesman starts to come up to greet us, but I can see in the salesman's face, this guy thinks that these two young guys can't afford anything that's in this shop. I'm afraid we're going to get kicked out of here. So I think I go to him and say, sir, my name is Alex van der Heever. This here is Renias from Plongo. He's the prince of the Shangaan people in South Africa. We are looking for an estate car, which looked like a car.
Beautiful.
Within minutes, you can see him sailing down the King's Road with a left. In many ways, that became the highlight of his trip. I know, Ren, you'd like to say a few things here.
When
Alex came to Dixie, he learnt about our culture. And he learnt our language. When I went to London with Alex, I learned Alex's culture and Alex's language. And my English improved a lot as a consequence of that trip. When we got back to Londolozi and started taking our safaris again, our main focus when we got back was to track leopards at Londolozi. And I cannot tell you what happened in London, but when we got back to South Africa after that trip, our effectiveness in finding leopards just went right up.
Man, Alex said, I forgot
The number of times we were tracking and finding leopard per week just went off the charts.
and
And you must understand that the guests that come to Londolozi, as I alluded to earlier, they just want to find leopards. To track and find a leopard is not simple. It's not like tracking your dog on the beach in Durban. Their tracks are very small. They tread very lightly. You've got to watch for the very, very faintest obscurities on the ground.
They're very,
very light, so they leave very few signs. They often go into the grass, and you've got to watch for little bent pieces of grass. You've got to be You've got to be listening to the alarm calls and all the other animals' behavior in order to piece together what that animal is doing. It's often the bird that tells you where the leopard is, not the tracks. All the sounds that are going on around you tell you what's going on around you, and that helps to give you a picture of what that leopard is doing. And that's what we became very good at by the time we got back from London. When my Shangaan was better, my tracking skills were better, and Ren's ability to speak and understand English had improved as well. Thank you very much. And we started to have a conversation about how do we ensure that these tracking skills that Ren has just described to you are not lost forever. And so in 2009, we resigned from our jobs at Londolozi, our comfortable jobs at Londolozi, and we went into the chilly wind of unemployment with a dream. A dream to create a school which would create the next generation of interracial films, the next generation of master trackers. And we went to the United States of America because that's where everybody told us the money was. We traveled around for the best part of 2009, teaching people tracking bears and jaguars and wolves and things. And every time we arrived at a city, we would do a talk and we try to raise funds for our idea to create a tracking school back in South Africa. By the end of 2009, we got back to South Africa without a dollar to show for our efforts. I was back in Plettenberg Bay, my hometown, on the beach in Plet. I was days away from phoning Ren to tell him I was going to get our jobs back at Londolozi when I get to meet the Rupert family, the Johan Rupert family, who, long story short, agrees to fund and found and support our idea. And in 2010, we opened the Tracker Academy. We choose the hyena as our logo because the hyena is the greatest tracker in the animal kingdom. And we get our first cohort of 8 young men, all rural, all from rural villages, close to big wildlife villages in this area, Kruger National Park, Okavango Delta, Zambia, Eastern Cape, representing many of the provinces in this country. We brought them onto a full-time, year-long program. And that was 2010. In the last 15 years, we've trained 300 young men and women as professional trackers. And the statistic we're most proud of, is that of those 300, 288 are now in permanent conservation jobs as a result of this. And the inspiration is in the room. These young people are earning good money, they're building homes, they're educating their children. We are now the first ever tracking training organization in the world to receive formal educational accreditation. Here's a few pictures. Then a few years ago, we started the Rhino Guardians program, which is a newish division of Tracker Academy. We were training 16 a year trackers to go work in tourism lodges Now we train 16 a year to go and protect rhino. I don't know if you know, but the Kruger National Park has gone from 12,000 rhino to under 1,000 in 12 years. We've lost the rhino in the Kruger almost. That's happening right here in KZN as we speak. And Renius and I ran an audit a few years ago. We went and evaluated all of those people, the most experienced field rangers, the most experienced anti-poaching operatives, tasked with protecting our rhino. We audited them, we evaluated them on their man-tracking skill, their ability to follow and find a poacher in the bush. And 72% of them, so the most of them, were unable to pass our even most basic evaluation. And that's why we're losing rhino. Well, it's one of the big reasons. And so what we did was we employed this man. His name is Amos Nzimba. He worked in Kruger National Park for 27 years. He's 63 years old. He successfully himself tracked and apprehended over 300 rhino poachers in his 27 years. He's the most decorated anti-poaching operative of Kruger National Park in its history. This is confirmed by the leadership. This is not just my opinion. He had to take early retirement due to PTSD. He's been shot 3 times. He's been run over twice by black rhino. And the poaching syndicates were after his family. We now brought him on, and now he's our trainer, our head trainer for our what we call our Rhino Guardians program. There are some harder stories that we can also tell. Some difficult times we've had that we've got through. And it's all written very openly and honestly in our book called Changing a Leopard Spots. But I'd like to share with you these 3 things. They're very simple, basic, universal human traits that we think can help you too, if you're interested in pursuing a productive life in this country. The first is be accepting. When you offer acceptance, you make people feel like they belong. If you offer judgment, people will filter, they'll hold back, and you will create a fake environment around you. 2, be curious. Be interested. People are desperate to be heard. They want to share what's important to them. And curiosity is the antidote to implicit bias. 3rd, be warm. This may sound fuzzy, but it's not. In fact, this is the one that makes the first 2 work. When you're warm to someone, you make them feel emotionally secure. If they feel secure, they'll trust you faster. Red and I believe that if you can do those 3 things well enough for long enough, you're going to have a positive outcome. The transformation of this country, indeed the success of your businesses, are inextricably linked to the power of your relationships. And Red and I believe that productive relationships are only built when you understand the life stories of the people you are dealing with. Thank you very much. If you believe and if the message you heard this morning resonated with you, take it to your families, take it to your company, and take it to the country. I'm not saying you must form relationships with everybody in South Africa who are different to you. Select one person. And I'm also not saying that forming relationships is going outside and having a cup of coffee with them. It doesn't work like that. It takes a long time. We must get together one-on-one. We must help each other understand each other's cultures. We must help each other understand each other's sports. We must visit each other's homes. If we can do that on an individual basis, we'll change the trajectory of this country in a single generation. And it will come back to you and in your professional lives, and your companies will also benefit. That's the message I'd like to leave with you today. Thank you so much. Yeah.